So we're back once again. I'm Michaela Kennedy hosting our Expert Summit. And our next guest, I'm so excited to introduce you to Mark Winstein. Is it Winstein? I'm sorry, I didn't ask you. Yes. With Vegan Launch. Welcome. Excuse me. Mark has been a long-time vegan over decades. That's one of the honors that I'm having to bring you aboard to interview you today.
I myself, it's just 5 years.
Just 5 years.
I've been an environmentalist since 1970, but only a vegan since 2016. Unfortunately, I'm a late adopter on that, but it's influenced my environmentalism greatly.
Wow, yeah. Oh, my bad about that. Yes, but it's amazing. That's right. As an environmentalist, Mark, tell us your story. I'm sure that, way back in the 70s, I'm of the same generation. And activism and business didn't seem to go hand in hand for a long time.
Well, very early on, I began to, as a kid, you're not really familiar with charities, business, whatnot. And then by the time I was about 18, one of my friends had joined a group called Coalition for the Environment. And he was trying to fight these giant polluters. This was the era of something called Superfund, where in Missouri, there's this place called Times Beach, which was like the poster child for polluters. And, dioxin, and what was going on is that these, large areas of land were just polluted beyond belief. And the government came up with this Superfund program to basically dig up, 10, 20, 30 feet of soil, haul that off and replace it with soil that wasn't contaminated. But there's a process to try to get these companies to stop polluting, first of all. And so he was working for this charity, St. Louis Coalition for the Environment. He was making $3 an hour going door to door. And at that point, I just thought, we're never going to solve these problems if the responsibility is so inappropriately distributed. And I reasoned really shortly after that businesses are the largest entities on the planet, the largest social entities. And so I thought if we really are going to take care of the planet, we're going to need to have businesses whose purpose is just that, and that they can operate at scale. And I've literally been working on that set of issues my whole life, how to get to scale, because people have been so indoctrinated since the founding of the Sierra Club in 1904 that taking care of the environment is the job of charities. It's absurd. It doesn't work enough. It works better than nothing, but not a whole lot better than nothing. And now I'm really happy to say that we're in position to really execute on what I've been saying. In the journey of how that happened was more complicated. I don't want to take up all of our time with that, but
no, but what you're saying, Mark, about it's really powerful that, you hit the nail on the head. Something that's been weighing on my head for the last week is, why does it have to be in the hands of the activists? Why does it have to be in the hands of the nonprofits? Because at the end of the day, a nonprofit and a for-profit, they have to have good business sense, and they have to have a sense of purpose to move forward regardless. And that's where it's as you said, it's starting to bleed. Have you seen more for-profit companies now taking responsibility?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, there's never been a shortage of for-profit companies in the space. The issue really was a matter of capitalization. And so what people don't understand is that in 1933, under Franklin Roosevelt, a law was passed called the Securities Act. And the Securities Act basically ended access to capitalism for all but the wealthy. And effectively, so, there's a lot of twists and turns in the evolution of the venture capital fund in places like Silicon Valley, where a person can still get funded, but basically it became illegal to speak publicly about raising capital in 1933. And that pretty much cut off capitalism for all but the wealthy who could afford the kind of lawyers and compliance fees. So we've been in about an 88-year sort of black hole where we didn't have freedom of speech about raising capital. Wow. And under the Jobs Act of 2012, the laws were changed, and the first real public, and there were some other, the first public free speech law from, or regulation from that law went into effect in 2013. The next one came out in 2016, which is known as regulation crowdfunding. And then in March, that got updated. So we only this year really have tools that work to restore free speech to founders who want to raise capital. And so this is one of the reasons that charities have been kind of a fallback, because there's hardly any regulation around raising charity, except that you can't sell equity in a charity. So there's no real hope of a charity ever scaling. And so if we look in comparison, PETA is 55 million a year in budget. So they're 100th of the smallest Fortune 500 company. So that's on the vegan side. If you look at the Sierra Club, now they were formed in 1904, same year as General Electric. General Electric's like a $40 billion company. The Sierra Club's only a $150 million enterprise. So the problem with the charity model is that you're paying customers, or either individual members, they are buying donation products or larger foundations, but either way, they're buying a donation product. And the nature of that kind of giving is just not scalable. It may be sustainable at a small scale. And when we look, say, as vegans, the meat industry alone spends $120 million a year just on lobbying expenses, not to mention their entire marketing. So we've been, ever since I became cognizant of this when I was 18, that would have been 1978. I realized we were in the wrong arena, and then that the only real arena for an activist would be finance and business. And we have to visualize the world we want and build the businesses that would flourish in that world. That's exactly what Elon Musk has done. So we now have one example in my whole life, the first example in the public domain. But I've seen thousands literally of green companies, and it's similar with vegan companies, who are not getting capital because the old regulations made it so hard. We've broken through. Those limits are gone, but most people don't know, and they're still chasing the handful of vegan venture capital funds or friends and family rounds. This is an insane way to solve the problems that
it's an embedded mindset as well.
Right. We're taught about investing as a public from people that have no interest in our success. Those would be, the major brokerage houses. I won't name names because none of them are really, it's not like they're bad actors. It's just that once those laws went into place, then the decision about what gets financed in the country became the domain of a very tiny number of people. Instead of, you want to build a restaurant, you should be able to raise money from your friends in the neighborhood, in the community. That's illegal unless you follow the new laws. Again, that just really got upgraded to becoming useful only in March of this year.
So then we have the law changing in 2013. And in the next few years, you started gravitating toward veganism, yes?
Well, yeah, the main law called regulation crowdfunding went into effect on May 16th of 2016. And by September 1st of 2016, I went vegan. And the decade before, I tried to raise a public venture capital fund because, see, public conversation is how we build culture. So to some extent, charities can be successful because they do have a public conversation. The problem is scale, the marketing budget, the ability of PETA or the Sierra Club or any of these nonprofits to get to scale with their conversation is too small. The only way to have enough conversation power is with capital and business, because those enterprises can afford their marketing. So when we look, the most effective activists on the planet are McDonald's and Walmart. And of course, the meat industries. And I'm not even saying that in a disparaging way. If we look, we just disagree with their value set, but their methodology is fundamentally sound. And it's been the same methodology since the dawn of civilization. So here, charity-based activists are generally trying to leverage culture. They're trying to somehow get the politicians to gang up on the powerful. Politics has never worked that way. It's always from the powerful down. And yet we vegans hold $3 trillion of public stock. We are the powerful. We're just disorganized. And if we expand that to all the green-minded investors who are not yet vegan, then we've got a $30 trillion pool and 34 million investors to work with. We can finance any solution we want on the planet. We do not need to wait for the government to act. And we certainly don't need to wait for Wall Street financiers to decide it's okay to save the planet, because they're never going to get it at this rate. The rate they're going, they're going to get it when their own house on the Hamptons is flooded.
Wow. Yes.
So
and
instead,
this,
with direct, now we can go direct to market with investment products, which means we can use investment products for at any stage along the development path, from raw startup to even an IPO. We can use those investment products as a public communication channel, in addition to the marketing that the companies will do later after they're funded. So we have now a whole messaging building the market. This is how Whole Foods grew the organic food movement. They got a foothold, marketed, people adopted the organic mindset, that created more value, more money, and now you've got a flywheel. Well, that's what we really need. We need a revenue generating flywheel. Charities are not that. Charities are, you got to beg every year. It's a begging operation, and there's no fundamental reason why people should keep renewing except that they keep caring. The value proposition is triangulated. It's just not a scalable approach to any kind of problem. It has its use, it has its function. It's a long story about how charities even came into being and why there's even a professional charity. The initial charity regulations in the United States prohibited anybody from getting paid who was associated with actually carrying out the services. And I kind of wish that had never changed. But really what charities are now, it's just, the Bill and Melinda Gates charity and all those charities of those kind of people. These are just tax dodges for them to get cheap marketing for their agendas. And we can use charities in the same way if we want. It's just, these are not fundamentally, what's a real charity? It's where you give to a disenfranchised party and you're not making money off the deal. And that can hardly be said about any charities anymore.
So you can probably say the same thing about a lot of small businesses. And of course, so many small businesses and so many nonprofits run a parallel with their same 80% failure rate. And at the end of the day, you really need to have a good business sense to move forward and to be productive. And I love the positive ideas that have been that you have born with Vegan Launch and providing. Where can people who are looking for ideas that you're talking about right now with investing and finding vegan investments? Please speak more about that.
Well, okay, so basically, if you're a vegan, there's a handful of investment opportunities that are currently publicly traded. And this is another thing, most people have no idea how enterprises end up being publicly traded, but it's like any other. If we think of investments as an investment product, that product has to be developed, and that product develops alongside the company. So for example, Beyond Meat, which has been popular with vegans, that company was in development for 10 years before they went public, giving the public access to their stock. But it wasn't the first stock they sold. They started selling stock 10 years ago to private investors. And this is all, again, an outgrowth of the Securities Act. Now, their largest round, their last round before they went public was 50 million. Now, Vegan Lunch, we can raise $75 million at a crack if we, it takes a little bit of resources, but not that much to do that. And we have associates that can raise that kind of money now. So the need for private rounds is just, there's just no need for it anymore. Same with Oatly. So that's Oatly's 20 years in development before they went public, but we have lists of nearly 2,000 vegan companies that are seeking capital today. And so really what it is, it's a processing issue. How quickly can we provide those leaders with the capital they need? So we're really in a leadership crisis, that the people who are stepping up and saying, I want to build a business, a scalable business that solves a problem in the vegan economy, they're starved for capital, and there's no reason, because the vegans have $3 trillion. So Vegan Launch is like a connector, but we're really a business development platform. A lot of people say, well, do you vet the deals and all this kind of stuff? Because again, they're mistrained by culture. It's not about vetting deals. It's not about picking winners. It's about making winners. So it's really, the more members that we have, the more general members who are willing to invest as little as $100 in these companies, the more of those members, the faster we can get these founders on a development path. And so one of our founders that went through the program after March, when things got easier, when she came into our founders mentoring program, she was clueless about capital. Now she's raised her first 50,000, and that's only in a matter of months, just through our mentoring as well as the systems that we're providing. So we'll call that proof of concept. Her goal is 250K, and anybody can visit our site and click through to her deal. But the rest of the 2,000, they're all failing, except for a handful. Maybe 1 in 200 companies is actually getting capital. If you want access to those deals, right now you have to be what's called an accredited investor, because they're all funding under most of the deals are getting funded under these old rules. So we participated in a deal early on in 2019 where the minimum investment was basically $50,000 US. That cuts out almost even most millionaires can't afford that. So now we're taking the whole, these are antiquated, outdated approaches to solving large scale problems. I'm not saying there's no place for venture capital or private offers, but fundamentally, we're dealing with an issue of educating people about veganism as fast as possible. We should not be doing deals quietly in the dark. And then, and look at Oatly and Beyond Meat. Their stocks have tanked. Most people who invest in them have lost money. Most of the public investors have lost money. Most of the private investors made hundreds of times their investment, maybe even more. So we're having this is not good for the movement. That those of us who, whether it's environmentalists that build the environmental movement or vegans that build the vegan movement, we should be able to invest in round one, not when a Blackstone group decides it's okay for these companies to go public. And the beauty is they can raise money from the public without having to trade. Trading is bad for most small companies. Mm-hmm. And you see companies get on these exchanges, and now they're fodder for short sellers and stock manipulators. That's not good for the company. They need to be privately held, but that's the innovation of these laws, that for the first time, public, since 1933, at least, the first time since 1933, public investors can invest in private companies. So before 1933, there were no finance laws. Anybody could design any kind of finance scheme they wanted, and if they wanted to sell it to the public, they could do it. If they want to sell it to their country club friends, they could do that, unregulated. And then it got regulated to the point where only those with friends at the country club could raise capital. And the rest of us have been scrambling ever since. And yet we know from all the different developments, Kickstarter in 2009, that people are so eager to see startups succeed, they'll just give the money to the startups And so it was only a small step to say, well, why don't we at least let them get some equity for their gift, for their giving spirit, shall we say. So anyway, the bottom line, the answer to the question is, we're a business development community. I'm teaching people how finance works. I'm teaching them how to develop businesses, whether they're founders or whether they want to be advisors to founders. You come to Vegan Launch and you're part of this community, and we're uniting around a goal of mobilizing $1 trillion by 2025, which is not that far away. But I'm putting up a new presentation. It's on YouTube already, explaining exactly how we can do that with a relative handful of participants.
Wow. And you also have the free course, don't you?
Well, yeah, I made our flagship course, Capitalism for Activists. I made that free because, people need to develop trust. When it comes to, it's one thing to buy something from Amazon, you can return it, so I bought a microphone. It wasn't the name brand. It works fine. I'm not going to return it. You know what I'm saying? But when it comes to investing in money, and people are so confused because the laws have left the decisions about how our culture looks in the hands of the 1%. Now it's not necessary. We don't need new laws now. We just need to take action. But I made that course free so people could begin to dive in and see if it's for them. For the right person, that free course will make them into a billionaire. The right people. And for the average people, it'll at least give them an understanding of how they can participate if they really care about changing the world. This is a whole different way to go than yelling at people or educating people. Look, both have maybe their place. I'm not that big at yelling at people. Certainly there's a whole industry of vegans doing online courses on how to go vegan. I think that's really vital. Those courses don't really need capital. When it really comes to solving various problems, when we really look at the issue, to really get the vegan ethic built into our economy, we need to be able to move a lot of capital to undo infrastructure. Really, there's heavy investments in things that are destroying the planet. We need to be able to not just tell people to go vegan, we need to be able to give them a whole alternative ways of living, and that takes capital. So, so that's a whole different path. And, government action, education, protests, this is a whole different path. Here we really can visualize the future we want, decide what that looks like, and then finance those companies. We have $1 billion portfolio unfunded at the moment of forest restoration projects. It would be completely compatible with vegan and environmental ethics, and help solve climate change at the same time as protecting animal habitat and restoring habitat. And these things generate revenue on paper. At least we need to get them funded to give them a chance to really prove themselves out. But I've seen their financials. I don't have much doubt that they'll work. And so, so that's why I do what I'm doing, because the hard problems, I believe the hard problems take a bigger level of agreement. So when we're organizing capital, we're really establishing the most profound agreements that are available in our culture. And I don't care whether you're in Russia, Sweden or the US, in the end, it's the same kind of agreement. It's not about capitalism. It's about what money symbolizes in every culture.
As you're talking, I'm also realizing that, and I said it a little while ago, and I'll mention it again, that we have mindsets ingrained. And a lot of what you have said today are things that I did not know that I did not know. And I was told at a young age that I was no good at finances, I was no good at numbers, and I believed who told me that.
Good way to start.
And I think a lot of people are like that. And I believe that I feel, especially since I've met a number of people who have ideas, who have absolutely no idea that they almost take it as a worth issue. Oh, nobody would invest in me. Oh, well, I couldn't go to all that trouble, because, we have that idea that of how difficult it was and how it was only really available to those who could pay for it. Um, Changing these attitudes is why I'm here and why I'm interviewing experts like you, Mark, because you're showing that, hey, you know what? We're all people and we all have great ideas and we have the ability to act on them if we want to, and we shouldn't let money get in the way. In fact, you said something that I never heard anyone say before, that we need, a big wave of capital to make change. That was very interesting.
Well,
I
let's just
guess
say that that'll help. I mean, I think that's a more peaceful way than just letting the world collapse, which is kind of the where we're headed now. Money is commitment. People, if people don't get paid, they generally won't go to work. I mean, and so there's money is what we use to symbolize commitment, and there's $100 trillion in the public stock market. That's just one pool of capital. There's private investing. That's another, I'm not sure, probably another 100 trillion there. And real estate, precious metals. So, there's just trillions and trillions of dollars of potential commitment. And if we dock with that language, whatever that language is, wherever the money is organized, if we can connect to that by using the right understandings, and the understandings are they're not so foreign, because an apple tree is very capitalistic. You plant a seed and then you have to invest, you water it and protect it from the deer for a while. And then after a while, suddenly it's producing a recurring crop of apples. So there's really not capitalism is very ecological. That's in its design. Now,
very true, yes.
The one thing that the problem is human beings themselves. Human beings have been using war and domination and force and exploitation long before capitalism. And they'll be using it, maybe they'll use it long after capitalism. I mean, Vegan Launch is a peace-based approach. And when you use capitalism in a sophisticated way, it can be a tool for peace. It doesn't have to be in support of exploitive and corrupt type of people. But those kind of people have been with us for a long time. And so I'm not a capitalist per se. It's just, this is the deck in our generation we're dealt. We can either wait for a better system, somehow the perfect system, and then we can get started solving the problems. I think I've taken peace as our basic design framework, and then looking at scale. What is the real scale of these problems? What are the barriers to scale? And I decided literally 20 years ago, the barriers to scale were good people tend to get diverted into the charity business model, which is a disaster in terms of scale. And if we really wanted to change the world, we activists need to learn and understand finance and understand why that works. It is like the apple tree. The apple tree, charities don't have to comply with the same rules, and they don't grow. For the apple tree to grow, there's certain rules: good soil, sunlight, water, and maybe some fertilizer. You don't do, these few basic things, it won't work. So what is it with capitalism? You have to get off the ground, you have to provide some kind of value. And you have to provide essentially a surplus of value to people. Somebody one time gave a nice talk about what is a transaction. And let's say I've got a pair of shoes I'm selling for $100 and you've got $100. In that transaction, both parties get more, right? If I got the shoes, I'm trying to sell them, I want the $100 more than I want the shoes. You want the shoes more than you got the $100. It's a very interesting concept. That's one of the interesting, beautiful things about commerce, is that in the end, both people actually get more. Now, when people are talking about exploitation, what's going on is that people want to get the value. It's usually relating to how they treat their workers. In fact, actually, a really interesting discussion I just saw yesterday, I think. General Motors is trying to get a bunch of subsidies from the government for their, unionized labor force to make electric vehicles, or at least to
Right.
make, or at least to prop up their hybrid line. Well, it turns out that they pay their workers less than Tesla. Tesla's workers earn way more than the union workers. Now, how did that happen? Because GM's been around for a long time. You know, that's a sign that they're exploiting the workers. They're not willing to pay them what they're really worth. And that's really what's going on when we look at value creation. We're not willing to pay up and down the food chain of who's creating value. Yeah, you could maybe arguably say that maybe a CEO should be paid more because the CEO is holding a bigger responsibility than a person working on the line. Like the person working on the line, they're responsible for their part. So maybe they shouldn't be getting $1 million a year, and maybe a CEO is worth $1 million a year. But as a CEO, you know, when you're getting, at what point are the CEO's needs met well enough for them to carry out their responsibility? Because their real responsibility is essentially a fiduciary responsibility to the whole organism, right. The shareholders, as well as all of the workers. And what we're finding is a great imbalance where the workers are considered as disposable, not valuable. Now that's where you start getting an exploitation, which is why I love veganism, because if you can have compassion for animals, maybe you'll have compassion for humanity as well. Because there's not a lot of that going. There's not a lot of that going on right now.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm in animal welfare, and it takes when people enter, a lot of them are saying how much they hate people, but it takes a lot of working with animals to make them realize, oh wow, people are animals too. We're all beings all together.
Or animals are people too. One of the two, but yeah, no. What was the name? Great spiritual story. Was it Bodhidharma, the guy that brought Buddhism to China? And the story is somebody went up to him and they said, well, I have compassion for the whole world, every animal from an ant, but I just can't feel compassion for my neighbor. And Bodhidharma just said, just quit. Don't even try to get enlightened. It's just, you're wasting your time. And that is really the thing. If you can't, the people we have the least compassion for typically our own family members. The people who are the most close to us are the ones that we have the hardest time viewing them as, giving them the right to live their lives the way that they think is best for them. It's really hard to do. And even as vegans, I think the great thing about veganism is because we've all gone through that conversion. And, with the minute number of people who were raised vegan, the rest of us had to see the transformation in it and do it for ourselves. And, because of that, we should be able to have compassion for the other. The challenge is that when we wake up, what we realize is, there's something else going on again. It's what I call parent-child. You're a kid, you're happy. And then one day you realize the adults are completely fucked up and that they haven't been taking care of the world for you. And they gave you life and put you in this world that they are just destroying as fast as possible. And it's scary as hell. And, my wake up was a little more mellow, but I grew up in a peaceful little neighborhood, and people were just cutting down trees for no reason. And those were my friends. It was just to widen roads and, just to get their hands on some government money. There was no fundamental, like most people do anything for money, literally anything. And maybe it was, some people draw the line at killing, outward killing, but beyond that, and plenty of people are fine with that as well, to get money. So that's where we are as an ethical culture right now. So as vegan, sorry, just 1 second, my camera it's a little funky. Let's take a second. So can we have compassion for that part of humanity? That's the hard part. But once you do, it's very relaxing to realize that even those people are humans, and there's something that they haven't seen a certain light, because the war motif is partly, this, we respond to that in a certain way, right? It's self-preservation run amok.
Mm.
And I also believe that as we began to eat animal products, that ruins our body chemistry. I've certainly seen the transformation in me. I call it the meat mind, because I had one.
Yeah,
And then
and
after,
it's a shock to me. I mean, I was vegetarian, but when, I didn't realize, even as a vegetarian, was, sometimes meat eater, I was a spiritual decision for me. And I also dealt with a lot of emotional reactions from family and stuff. It was my own stuff because I didn't feel I had a thick enough skin to handle it. So I was hiding it a lot of the times. But now that I love what you said, you relax into it, and you relax and you realize we're all humans, we're all going through our stuff. And to realize as a byproduct, this glowing health.
well, and we all have a kind of fear. The fear serves a purpose, right? We wouldn't want to have no fear, because then we would just walk to the edge of the cliff and just walk over. So, nature has given us in our DNA these emotions, which are like the controls of an airplane to keep us from just crashing. But they're just for survival purposes. And what goes on is that the fear gets really out of control, and our body chemistry has a lot to do with that. So it's not like have no fear anymore. It's not even that I don't have any aggressions or, residual hatred, because I practiced that way for years and ate that way for years. But the vegan body chemistry, our minds, there's 8 billion people or so on the planet. Every one of them has their own version of reality coming in, filtered through their mind, which is, again, heavily influenced by body chemistry and upbringing. And so when you start eating a plant-based diet, suddenly your intelligence goes up. I'm not a big fan of Sun Tzu, but basically the best war is no war. If you're a warrior, you don't want to go to war. As soon as you're on the battlefield, you're at risk, right? So you're a lousy general if you're putting your troops at risk every day. So so that need to fight, when you see better paths, that makes you a better general of your own life. The need to go to battle it just seems to disappear, because there's just very little that actually requires a fight to get your way. Why did I become a peacenik? Very selfish, because I had been kind of a war motif. I was in Washington, D.C. during the 90s, the nonprofit we built. Everyone was reading Sun Tzu and The Prince by Machiavelli. These books were sold by the stack in the bookstores in Washington, D.C. How to play the game in Washington, D.C. None of that. I wouldn't recommend any of those books to anybody anymore, but it took me a while. So we were reading Sun Tzu and trying to figure out how to get our strategic advantage over our so-called enemies.
Some too.
And then later, I had this epiphany, and I realized it's like, well, if I treat these guys as enemy, I can't even talk with them. Like, they were raised differently than me. What do they know about ecology? Maybe they've never even heard of it before. So I started actually making a point to speak to everybody who I thought was my enemy. Turns out they were actually really very much more willing to help than a lot of our friends. That's the odd thing. So divisive partisan politics, totally dead end game. If you want to lobby, you need to go with love. Love is way more effective than divisiveness for getting things done. And then my life so what was I saying? My life got so much simpler after I stopped holding on to that, because there was fear. I used to run home from the office because I was afraid someone was going to get me, because we used very violent language. We didn't use any real violence, but we spoke very meanly about our opponents. And once I stopped doing that, I just felt, not only was I peaceful, but my fundraising scaled up, and the kind of people I met in Congress and the willingness to do, like, everything got 100 times easier. And I realized that we had wasted so much energy. So peace is a very selfish thing for me. I still
Wow.
want to make the world the way I want, just like we all do.
Hmm.
If you go at it with a peace-based approach, it's just a hell of a lot easier than if you go at it like you think you're some kind of Sun Tzu warrior or Machiavelli. That's a very hard thing because you got to always cover your own ass, and that's when you really look at what goes on in Washington. 90% of the activity of the Congress is covering their ass, not actually getting anything done for people.
That's so beautiful, Mark. And it's something that I've only recently come to terms with myself. And it all came, dovetailing with my turn to veganism. And that's why we're here today, to share that, the struggle. It doesn't have to be a struggle. We don't have to be putting our emotions on default reactions to what's going around us, but to hold that vision and to move forward. And without visionaries like you, we would not be. We'd be in a lot worse shape, I think. I'm so proud to be able to make new friends like you that are leading with love in the economy.
Well, thank you very much. I've learned from some great people, everything I could from every leader I've ever met, and whatever books I could read. But there's not a whole lot of guidance to be had in what I'm doing. I've had to innovate, but there are people, the people who are very foresightful, who went to the Congress and got them to change these laws to give us some of our freedom of speech back again when it came, those are some very important visionaries who will probably never really give them the credit that is owed to them for the kind of change that we can now, they've given us a tool set that we didn't have in the 2000s when I started on this path. And so now, because of the public discourse around capital available now, around public investment offers into privately held startups, now that that's possible, that creates a whole set of conversations in vegan launch where people can become what I call citizen financiers. And we even have, if you become a paid member at Vegan Launch, we also have, you can join the organizers group, where people who want to contribute to the growth of the community itself, there are all kinds of revenue opportunities in that area as well. So I'm not sure we'll ever have paid staff again, because there's so many opportunities to make money, not only just as vegan founders have their own money-making idea in their business, but people who want to be citizen financial leaders and activists, we're providing them methods for earning revenue so that they can do this kind of hard work of bringing together communities around, if they want to veganize a city or veganize a state or a province or a whole country or a whole sector. Because the hardest part about being in the finance business is making sure that you pay your own bills while you're having these discussions that lead to, moving $1 billion or 10 billion here and there. You got to be able to pay your bills while you're doing that. And we provide methodologies for people who want to get in this field to do that. And that way they don't have to, otherwise the path is very narrow into finance. Go to an Ivy League school and, work at Goldman Sachs or something and learn finance from people that are completely clueless about how to solve the world's problems. And then what are you going to do with that information? Now you've been trained wrong. In a war motif, wrong strategy, wrong understanding. And then what? And I do hope to help retrain many of the, people who may decide that they're not who are employees in these enterprises. And to be honest, I'm not here just to trash Goldman Sachs and BlackRock and the rest of Wall Street. If they want to hire Vegan Launch, we'll show them how to do it the right way, because they're not doing it the right way now. Otherwise, the world would have been saved already. They have so much access.
Oh, you are speaking truth. Yes,
yeah,
it's a new world, and we're ready to hear it.
I'm here to plant seeds with anybody who's ready to listen. I don't care what their past is, what they did wrong. Because if I look back at what I did before I went vegan, I did a lot of wrong in that,
Yeah,
because I
we
didn't have the
did a lot.
framework.
And that's what I love about you too, is that you are talking to everyone, and you're meeting people where they are at, where they're at. A lot of people get too emotionally attached and antagonistic, and they have those old ways of fighting for what they think is right.
Well,
And it doesn't have to be
yeah.
that way at all. It doesn't. We can lead with our love.
Yeah, we can. And that's, younger people seem to take onto this more naturally. But,
Mm.
when I became a professional environmentalist, it was great, because now I had like a little imaginary card that allowed me to yell at anybody about anything. And, that was very, there's something about that we like, but in the end, it doesn't really work. That's the problem, is that kind of approach to social change is, I don't want to say it's unsuccessful, but it's very limited. And seeing the world in an us versus them approach always leads to small-minded solutions, which can't really, in the end, address the real systemic issues that we are facing. So, like, a big issue right now is that the U.S. is the only country in the world that doesn't have universal health care. The only major economy that doesn't have universal health care. There are plenty of other countries that don't have it, but in terms of developed countries, where, westernized countries, we are the only one. And how could that be? And yet yelling at Congress isn't working. And the thing is, if we imagine what kind of economy would become unleashed if we had universal health care, because if we look at other countries that do have it, like if we look at the way Sweden has handled the virus, well, when they've got universal health care, that means they're going to take the most efficient path, because they don't have just a blank check of tax dollars to spend. Otherwise, because they're already taxing people plenty to pay for their health care. So that meant that they had to use a much finer grained approach to the problem, and their results are speaking for themselves. Like, right now in the US, we're talking about vaccinating all the children, and there they had millions of children that have gone through the whole thing without, they went to school, they never stayed home. The schools stayed open, nobody wore masks, nobody got vaccinated, and their outcomes are better. Why? Because they have an economic interest to focus really hard on the science and pick the critical path through complex problems. So now, we can imagine the kind of economy, all the consultants, all the kind of people that might need to make healthcare work in the United States. We've got to have massive education of people about how to eat right. Otherwise, the costs are just going to go through the roof. Canada did it. Canada already did it.
It's a huge one. And I am so excited about the vision that you're bringing to us, Mark. And for people to know more about what you're doing and to find your offerings, it's veganlaunch.com. Is that correct?
Yes, veganlaunch.com, and
Great.
you'll find good information there for free. Again, you can sign up for the free course called Capitalism for Activists. And if you want to become part of the real active community, it's a very small monthly membership relative to any other finance investing community on the planet that I know. And because the goal is to really make this accessible to people who, whether they're a founder who doesn't have a whole lot of cash, or an investor who is willing and able to invest $100 here and there. If you want to grow those vegan values, this is your workspace to work together to grow the vegan economy. And again, bring people in until we're at the point where we're really handling that responsibility. The real vegan responsibility starts at $1 trillion. Anybody talking about less than that, we're not really in the game that's being played by the major people that decide how our culture works. BlackRock and Goldman, they manage trillions and trillions of dollars. If we don't want to get in that game with peace and vegan ethics, that's fine. But that's what Vegan Launch is about. And yet, if you just have $100 to invest, you're a part of the solution now. You know, I'm not
That's
trying to
huge.
just convince, I don't know, convince Jeff Bezos to go vegan or something like that, you know? Hopefully he
Well,
does. That'd be
you
great.
brought a lot of financial thought to us, and I really look forward to going through the course. And I really look forward to more financial advice from you. I'm sure I'm going to be hitting you up more in the future, Mark.
Well,
I
great.
need
Well, I
to.
look forward to seeing you.
Yes. Thank you again so much. So appreciative. I'll be sending you the replay, the recording, and I'll be in touch. Many blessings for the end of the year. Happy holidays.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Bye-bye.
Bye.